Bitcoin, and that seems to be the life raft. Certainly it is here in El Salvador. More and more people are talking about Bitcoin in this context, in the global context, saying that globally things look effed up and Bitcoin fits in as a solution. Once you offer yields that are above a 10-year treasury yield, you're starting to take risks that you shouldn't be taking. And once you get into the yields that they were offering, it's quite obvious that they are engaged in what was be a classic Ponzi scheme. Yeah, Bitcoin for sure is on the winning track. I just saw last week kind of something that reminded me of this. They have those screens when you log in, or it says prove you're not a robot. And it was being proven by a robot who was filling it out, and to prove that they weren't a robot. Oh, I'm getting it now. Lynn Alden, who's a really excellent analyst. And so I'm looking at this chart now, this incredible 45-degree angle straight up into oblivion of debt. And it starts now. They're projecting this incredible increase in debt, but they are not suggesting in any way. She goes on to say, to see what Lynn says, austerity historically doesn't work well once you get over 100% debt to GDP. GDP is so reliant on those deficits that cutting deficits hurts GDP too, right? So she's making the comment that to manage this debt, to get into an austerity budget, to try to bring the debt down, it's an impossibility. It's the old sea spider anus analogy. And doesn't that portend, though? Doesn't that suggest that they would come back with massive money printing? But Greg Foss, so he said that the debt spiral, pure math, and even the Fed cannot ignore it. Fiat debasement is 100% certain. So I guess this is the tide to the Lebanon, right? So the Lebanon went through this 90% devaluation on their currency, and this has been a story that we've been watching in horror for the last couple of years, and the inevitability of this debasement was coming. And of course, everyone was suggesting to them to buy Bitcoin. And but for the U.S. economy and the world's reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, this type of debt debasement, which seems on the horizon, of course, spells global problems, right? People robbing banks to get their own money. Yeah, and that happened a few times. And so for 30 years, bankers have been ignoring reality, hoping that at some point there would be enough growth to generate enough tax to generate some pay down on all this debt that they've incurred, and that hasn't happened. They just printed a lot more, and the debasement of the currency has followed. And now it's at the point where people have reached the end of their rope on a global basis. And into the mix, Stacey Herbert, the blonde volcano, is Bitcoin. And that seems to be the life raft. Certainly it is here in El Salvador. More and more people are talking about Bitcoin in this context, in the global context, saying that globally things look effed up and Bitcoin fits in as a solution. The Bernie Madoff story is a good analogy, and it's a good story to revisit, right? Because they were being investigated. It wasn't until the third time that the SEC got into the Bernie Madoff story that they finally busted him. But during that whole time, there was this nod, wink attitude from the people that were investing in Bernie Madoff, who knew kind of either consciously or subconsciously that there was some fraud going on, because he was delivering these results that were completely inconsistent with anything happening in the market. And when you get to the DeFi, the whole DeFi epoch in post-Bitcoin shenanigans, and everything after Bitcoin has been proven to be pretty much worthless. The DeFi period, which came after the ICO period, immediately it was like, okay, they wanted to sound like it's a financial product. Remember, the ICO sounded like an IPO, so it's kind of something to do with finance. And DeFi, distributed finance, these DeFi products, it sounds legit. But as you point out, and as even Peter Schiff pointed out, once you offer yields that are above a 10-year treasury yield, you're starting to take risks that you shouldn't be taking. And once you get into the yields that they were offering, it's quite obvious that they are engaged in what was be a classic Ponzi scheme. Because it's like they're telegraphing that there's a massive fraud coming. Like, why do they think they should publish something like that? Because if that's the truth and that's the reality that's going to be going forward, shouldn't they be doing something proactively to stop it? So you're entering into that phase of a collapse where the interest on the debt is not even payable by the taxes you're collecting. And then that's a game over. So, I mean, the game, I guess, is that the U.S. is still going to claim to have the best, the cleanest shirt at the laundry, right? Like it's going to be relatively better than all these other fiat monies, and that's how they're going to sustain this going forward. But the premise of that is that the machines or the robots are not great at reading the memes, right? The memes are too subtle. The memes can't be read. I mean, if I understand kind of what's being said there, that the memes keep us human. And then for me, what I think about is that the robots are assimilating and they are becoming part of an integral, inseparable part of our reality. And so in my view, I think I would have to consider the fact that a lot of memes are generated by self-aware, self-conscious robots, that they can create memes in ways to cause disruption. And so I think that this is part of the feedback loop and feedback mechanism that, for me, represents something of an existential threat, because the robots, whether it's the fact that the robots now became the best chess players in the world, that was a major milestone in my book, because it for thousands of years, that was the pinnacle of kind of gamemanship and intelligence. I would like to think that there is a refuge for humans against the encroachment of AI. I really do. But I also, and I just feel like the robots are getting really, really good at inserting themselves into every bit and piece of our existence. Yeah, Bitcoin for sure is on the winning track. I just saw last week kind of something that reminded me of this. They have those screens when you log in, or it says, prove you're not a robot. And it was being proven by a robot who was filling it out, and to prove that they weren't a robot. So, from a poetic standpoint, and from a standpoint of doing a lot of like creative writing, I kind of like the interesting house of mirrors this represents, because the way things reflect on each other can be quite interesting. And if the robots and the humans are kind of reaching a point where there's a lot of where they're kind of competing for a future, it represents an interesting, as an artist, it represents an interesting tableau to work on, because it's an interesting a place of silly putty and string theory and colors and things. It's just kind of fascinating to me. But I do believe that Bitcoin is ultimately triumphant for lots of different reasons. Oh, you're a toxic maximalist, right? Not in the last 6 months, since everything blew up. The history that you're talking about, this has been with us since the beginning. The good and evil, the forces are all in opposition. They're fighting each other. And what I have become to aware of, though, in the last 15 years, 20 years, is that it has become digital, and digital is a space that I think is cerebral. And so the war for good and evil, which used to be an extension of our being and used to be out there somewhere, and talk about the great classics, like Homer, the great epic poem through an ancient world, fighting good and evil and discovering things. It was very analog. And here we're living in a world it's very digital and very cerebral. And so, the toxicity is about the memes. So getting back to memes, this is what I'll say about memes. They represent the centuries that stand guard against the digitalization of evil as it tries to enter our cerebral digital space. That's what I'll say about memes. It's a chart, something like turkeys before Thanksgiving. Right. And for 364 days, it's great. And then on one day, suddenly it's complete disaster. It's Thanksgiving Day. Yeah. And that's the kind of charts we're talking about. So the turkeys, we're all heading to that arbitoire at the end of the long siesta of complacency. And then suddenly it all hits at once. And everyone's like, oh, what happened? The thing about memes is that they're able to cut through and speak to us directly on the human level. So Da Vinci is still very much in play 500 years later, with the Mona Lisa, is still showing us and telling us and guiding us toward a future in some way. So it's the most viewed artwork in the world. 25 to 30,000 people see the Mona Lisa every single day. And it still has the power of attraction that it had, hundreds of years ago. And that says something about memes.